So there's no property rights now to securities held in book entry form in any jurisdiction globally, period. That is over since 2016. So any stocks and shares you own through a broker, and even bank balances and any forms of debt, they are all now connected to the world derivatives market, and they're all used as collateral.
Yep, guys, that's the way it is, and you need to know about this. So it's The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. It's one of the talks I gave in Tisbury in the UK on my recent speaking tour, and I went from Southampton all the way up to Buxton and Ledbury and all over the place. Great crowds. So this story is one of the most important, and it was recorded professionally by Tim, and he maintains the fairplaynow.net website. So please do head over and subscribe to him and help him out. But with that, let's get into The Great Taking. Prepare yourself.
So this is the book. thegreattaking.com is the website. Go and download the book for free. And because I'm a kind of a YouTube person, I have to make a nice thumbnail. So I did that kind of, and it worked. It got a lot of views. It's the taking of collateral across the world. Everything, all of it. And it's kind of the end game of a long cycle of debt. And we're heading now into financial serious turbulence. And that's why all of this, what I'm going to show you, has been put in place. Included in The Great Taking by the top banks and the Bank of International Settlements. So the secured creditors who will get everything in the case of an implosion of the derivatives market. All financial assets, deposits of banks, stocks and bonds, all underlying property of public corporations. Anything linked to debt or owned through a broker, it's all covered. Property finance with any amount of debt can similarly be taken. So the rule here is own it outright, whatever you want to make sure you keep. This guy here, you all love him, I know. The Great Reset, and this is very connected. The Great Reset they're talking about relates very closely to this. But it's a fascinating structure that's developed over decades. And the proclaimed Great Reset includes all these innovations and etc. But it's really unprecedented concentration of wealth in the hands of a very few. And I think, and David thinks, the intention is at some point when things implode, which they kind of have to, they want to make sure that all the wealth can be taken by them. Right? And that's essentially it. And depriving people weakens society. So there's always that benefit. And why now? Well, it's really the private ownership of all central banks and all money creation. Started with the Fed in 1913, a private institution, nothing to do with federal government. And the Bank of England, private institution with hidden shareholders. It's nothing to do with the government. So these central banks are all privately owned. And they worked for 100 years to really concentrate their power, and their control over political parties, governments, intelligence agencies, State Department is enormous. And the WF is just one example. So a quick concept, velocity of money, it's the GDP divided by the money supply. So if your GDP or your real world growth is slowing down or low, or if your money supply is increased, which it has been, enormously over the last 20 years. I mean, the printers are just running on full bore. But the key is velocity of money, when it goes low, it's very dangerous, and it kind of predicts an impending major crash. And the velocity of money is now, or at least in 2020, at its lowest point since the Great Depression. And similar graphs of what was happening in the Great Depression are now becoming manifest now across a lot of different metrics. So we're heading into a very, very dodgy time. And I think that's why they rushed in the Great Taking over the last few years and made sure it was in place. So first step of the Great Taking is dematerialization. And all this is they had to get all the paper certificates of stocks, which gave you real ownership. They had to get rid of all paper and make it all electronic. And that was going on in the 60s, 70s, 80s, before they take the legal ownership of everything. So there's no property rights now to securities held in book entry form in any jurisdiction globally, period. That is over since 2016. So any stocks and shares you own through a broker, and even bank balances and any forms of debt, They are all now connected to the world derivatives market, and they're all used as collateral. So even if you have specifically said for certain stocks and bonds you have, you want them segregated, and the broker says, oh, of course, and segregates them away from the pool, that's illegal. They are in the pool. All of them are in the pool, and they're collateral for the derivatives market. It's just a legal fact now. In the grand scheme, to confiscate all of this, David believes they will confiscate. I'm not sure they get away with it, but they've done the work. Dematerialization was essential. And the planning and efforts, 50 years ago they started. The CIA was assigned to the mission, not a bank. Central Intelligence Agency was given this job. And the project leader was William Denser, a career CIA operative. He'd been decades in CIA operations before this. And even though he had no background in any aspect of banking or finance, he was appointed New York State Superintendent of Banks by Nelson Rockefeller, right? So everything that goes on, and this was new to me a year ago. I met David in Sweden in September. Always back to Rockefeller or other cronies. So it's a really tight group. He was chairman and CEO of the newly formed DTC. That was a kind of a structure to enable this great taking. And it eventually became the model for the Central Securities Depository, CSD, and the CCP. And you don't really need to know these, but these are huge legal structures to enable what the goal I told you was. The second step is security entitlement. They need to take away the securities ownership from everyone, even super rich individuals. They're all going to be affected by this. And I just mentioned, since 4 centuries ago, securities were fully owned securely by the person who owned them. That's why they were called securities, probably. And they were personal property, and laws everywhere protected that. And this is no longer the case. So a simple analogy, I didn't write it down. So if you bought a car, and by the way, this does not apply to a car you own, but it's a good analogy David used. So you buy a car and you pay for it from a dealer. But then the dealer goes and offers your car as collateral for other deals that he's doing, even though you're off driving it and you paid for it. And then it gets offered as collateral by another person, etc. That's the derivatives market. So you find out one day, dealer went broke. Well, that's not my problem. But it is in this structure, because your car will be seized because it was collateral the dealer used. You just didn't know it. And that's what's happened with all securities, stocks and bonds and all the other things. They are all pooled assets to secure the derivatives market, used as collateral. And if the derivatives market goes broke, or the broker, this legal infrastructure is there to give you a small slice of what you thought you owned. Essentially, all securities owned by the public in all these things, right, are underpinning the derivatives complex. So you don't own them. And that's legally a fact. And the enormous task of doing this started 50 years ago. And as David said, the people who actually put this in place, a surprisingly small number of people, they're dead now. But the people who've come after them keep going. And he said it's just insanity, but it keeps going. And no one knows about it. And that's the problem. Awareness is huge. People who, especially high net worth individuals, have to know this and then begin to make noise about it. And that will stop it. You know, there's states in America now, 2 of them, who are trying to bring in laws to overturn this. So remember, the bad guys, they work in the shadows. If the sunlight comes in, they scurry away like cockroaches. And that would happen if there was awareness of this. So that's the mission here, is awareness. These are the key facts. Ownership of securities or property has been replaced with a security entitlement. So you have an entitlement to a piece of what you used to own outright. And it's a contractual claim. All securities are held in unsegregated pooled form. And even if you try and restrict them from that, they are all in the same pool, legally. And all account holders, included those who have prohibited use of their securities as collateral, that'll be signed off, box ticked. It's irrelevant, it's illegal. They can only receive a pro rata share of the assets if there's a problem. You cannot be outside the system unless you have physical metal, gold, land, with deeds. It's the only way out. And revindication, which used to be a legal thing, the taking back of your securities, if your broker goes insolvent, that was the norm, is absolutely prohibited now. It has been removed from law, your ability to say, oh, the broker's gone bust, well, just send my Apple shares to broker B. That's illegal. You can't take them back. And this stuff is more, I won't go into detail here because it gets heavy, but safe harbor has been assured for secured creditors. And you'd say, well, who are the secured creditors that I have to go after my assets in the event of a problem and try and get a piece back? It's Morgan Stanley and the big banks. So when the implosion comes, the big banks will hoover up all the small banks after the collapse, big collapse probably, and the Bank of International Settlements, the central banks, it'll be all the top level of banks. They're the secured creditors for everything, right? So go figure. And the documentation this is irrefutable. So when I in Sweden saw David, it was 10 p.m. at night, and this guy, didn't know who he was. Within 3 minutes I was transfixed because he was showing legal documents, and I realized this is actually all true. And I was surprised. I was surprised. What about Europe, you'd say? So this is American State Department, CIA, and they went through all 50 states and got these laws in over 50 years, and they stayed away from the Supreme Court and the federal level because they knew there'd be questions asked. So they did it state by state, right? Sneaky. But what about Europe? We're okay. No. April 2004, European Commission, which is basically the communist Soviet system brought to Europe. That's the European Commission. It's like the Politburo in Soviet era. They said, oh, we need a legal certainty group to address problems of legal uncertainty around ownership. There was no problem. There was no problem, but they felt there was a problem. But they went to the US, who were forcing them to do this, and the Deputy General went to the Fed, the top of the top in New York, the Federal Reserve Bank, and they asked them a load of questions because Europe actually wasn't even sure what this was about. But they knew they had to do it because the US said so. And when the US says jump, you jump. That's it. So they asked them, legal system, respect of what legal system? And the Fed said, well, it's Article 8 and 9. And that's what I mentioned to you. The US had this fully legalized over 50 years. So there you go. Where securities are held in pooled form, blah, 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 does the investor have rights attaching to particular securities in the pool? No. They have a pro rata share in the interests of their asset held by the intermediary, like a broker. This is true even if investor positions are so-called segregated. So what I said, it doesn't matter if they say they're segregated. They're not, by law. Is the investor protected against the insolvency of an intermediary, like a broker or something? If so, how? An investor is always vulnerable to a securities intermediary that does not itself have interests that cover everything. In other words, if the intermediary goes broke, they don't. The secured creditor has control over the financial asset and will have priority. And that's JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, BIS. That's the people at the top. They have the security. And if the securities is a clearing corporation, the claims of, same thing. So that's the way it is. What rules protect a transferee acting in good faith? That's a good question. Article 8 protects the purchaser of a financial asset against the claims of an entitlement holder to a property interest. And what that means is, basically, we now have an entitlement, not ownership. So the big boys are protected against the owners, the entitlement owners. They're protected against them. Essentially, unless the purchaser was involved, now that's a purchaser purchasing off a bank or a derivatives complex, unless they actually did something illegal, the entitlement holder will be precluded from raising a claim. They'll get the crumbs later if there's something left, right? And remember, entitlement holder is us now. We used to be the securities owner. Now we're entitled owners, but it's all been taken away. How are shortfalls, blah, 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 dealt with? The only rule in such instances is that the security entitlement holders, that's what people who think they're owners, simply share pro rata in the interests held by the intermediary. Shortfalls occur frequently due to fails or other reasons. Do they say Shortfalls occur frequently due to fails and for other reasons, but are of no general consequence except in the case of a securities intermediary's insolvency. So they're kind of saying, look, there's problems sometimes, but really, don't worry about this. This whole thing is only when there's an insolvency. But of course, we know there's going to be a massive insolvency coming worldwide. Does the treatment of shortfalls differ according to whether there's no fault for the intermediary, if fault fraud, or if fault negligence or breach of duty? And essentially what the Fed says, regardless of fault, fraud or negligence of the intermediary that got in trouble, the entitlement owner only has a pro rata share. So even if your broker broke the law, it doesn't matter. And they're saying this applies universally regardless. And that's directly from the horse's mouth from the Fed to the European Union, all documented and published. No one knows about it, but the Fed told them, yeah, the owners are no longer owners. That's the way it is. I'll go through this quickly. David was asking cui bono, who benefits? And it's certainly not citizens, even extremely wealthy citizens. It's just the top of the heap benefit. They hoover up everything. And the reason for this legislation on legal certainty is demand for collateral by market participants. That's demand for collateral by the banking system into the derivatives market, which is enormous now. It's bigger than the whole world's GDP. When it goes pop, it'll be a big noise. And that's it. Market participants is a euphemism, for powerful creditors who control governments. That's essentially it. And they have worked with governments and legal departments and CIA, etc., to make sure it was set up like this. So they might not trigger it, but why did they spend 70 years, a huge amount of money and effort to put this legally in place, to not use it? And that's why David reckons, I'm inclined to agree, if things go bang badly, they'll probably use it. Harmonization, and I'm going to go pretty quickly now, certain secured creditors must be given legal certainty to client assets globally without exception. And I think I've kind of already gone through that. That's what they went about. But what about Sweden? Sweden and Finland by 2010 were the only countries in Europe that their national laws prevented this being valid, right? Finland and Sweden were the only ones who had the traditional legal arrangement of you owning your securities. And you could own government bonds and they were safe, right? So they're like an oasis, a haven. In 2006, the Legal Certainty Group identified Sweden and Finland as having problematic law. So they wouldn't even allow a couple of Nordic countries to be outside of this. So that's how vehement they are. And what happened then? Euroclear was brought in, used a Belgian legal kind of construct to pretty much buy out Sweden's banking kind of asset ownership model and circumvent the Swedish law. Okay, so that was Euroclear. And there are now these CSDs and these other structures that operate as an ICSD, which is the thing that has enabled this in America and the rest of the countries under Belgian law. So you can see the scamming. Like they couldn't actually do it under Swedish law, and they probably didn't want to bring awareness to it by changing the law because questions would be asked. So they actually did a roundabout way. They used Belgian law and a Belgian kind of shell company and made it own the Swedish assets in a legal way to circumvent Sweden's law. And Finland did the same. And I won't go through this. Oh, this is when they did this, they did a disclosure. But no one published or talked about it. It was just there, you know. And there's a couple of excerpts here. In the unlikely event of a shortfall of securities, the client in question will not be able to claim a right of separation, i.e. ownership. That's the ordinary person, even if rich, but will likely be considered as an unsecured creditor without priority. So the actual owner, same thing again, might have a bit of a claim. And then yada yada, that basically just says the same, but in gobbledygook text. But they're just disclosing, because they have to legally, hey, we've done this. But of course, no newspaper, no financial paper, no one covered it, no one knows. He said even senior hedge fund managers, top people in finance, none of them know about this. It was quietly done through corporate law and other mechanisms all over the world. No one knows about it. So this was more the stuff about Sweden. The royal decree was used. This is just circumventing their law. And he actually had Swedish assets. So he went to the SEB, Securities and Exchange Board, I think, and he asked the Conto specialist, are securities held, blah, 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 can the securities held be re-vindicated in the event of failure of SEB or of Euroclear, the Belgian structure? So he's just saying, well, is my money, can it be re-vindicated, i.e. given back to me, if there is a failure? And the specialist didn't know because no one ever asked him. So he went off for a long time and then came back and said, well, it's insured up to around 20 or 25,000 euro. Yeah, but he probably had, I don't know, 10 or 20 million. And he confirmed the holding of securities at Euroclear was the change made in whatever it was, 2014. And David said he seemed shocked himself to learn this. So the specialist had to go off and look it up, found out this, and actually couldn't believe himself that this was the case. He said the guy was gobsmacked coming back to David, you know. So that'll show you the top people and even experts just don't know this, you know. Collateral management, inevitably following the everything bubble, which a lot of people are calling the current macroeconomic state, will be the everything crash. And when that happens, this legal structure would allow the central clearing counterparties and the central banks to basically hoover up everything. Now, if they did that, I guess, you'd expect a revolution. You know, how would they pull it off? But if it happened and there was a crisis, you know, and Granny was dying for lack of collateral, a lot of people would kind of go, oh my God, it's a crisis. And, you know, and then they could offer everyone like 50,000 central bank digital credits. We've got the solution. We're going to give everyone 50K and we're going to give you back X% of the, you know, this has happened before, right? People have accepted madness based on a narrative. So it's possible. And here he was just talking and he was very gracious of him. He gave me a slide pack. It was 280 slides. I got it down to 30. It took me a while. It's a big story. But it was a deliberate strategy. And he reckons it was about ultimate complete power, allowing no centers of resistance. And he also feels it's about deprivation, subjugation, you know, just break people down further, take away their financial certainties, and it's all part of the ant farm model. So probably gold will not be confiscated this time around. And if people are aware, in the 1930s, the US government confiscated all gold from people. It's kind of weird, but they did it and people had to hand it in. But this time it's different because gold has not been targeted as an essential collateral backing as was the case under the Federal Reserve Act in the 1930s. So this time they're allowing gold to go by. And that's why I think it's a very important asset to hold. But in this go around, it is securities of all kinds, as I discussed globally, which have been set up as collateral backing underpinning the derivatives complex. So gold is still apparently a safe haven, physical gold. Paper gold, wouldn't touch it, wouldn't put it in the bath, right? Toilet paper. Because paper gold or like ETFs of gold or anything that represents gold, it's paper. And paper just gets into the conflagration when any of this happens. So it has to be physical. And someone last night actually was saying that they wouldn't even leave the gold in a vault in Switzerland or London. They'd rather have it. And there's a lot to be said for that. But he does say it doesn't assure indefinitely you will be allowed to keep your gold if this juggernaut continues in motion. But it's the best safe haven. And he believes that the people will become aware of this problem, will push back, and the problem won't happen, you know. But just in the case that the problem was allowed to happen, the bad guys did really well. He's just saying at some point then they'll be looking to have all physical assets tokenized and put into the new digital system. So tokenize your couple of acres, tokenize your physical gold. And once it's tokenized, it's forced into being paper asset, digital asset. So these guys are scumbags. I mean, the banks are the lowest form of human. I don't mean the lady, you know, who works at the desk in the local bank, but at the top, the people who have gotten to the top of the central banking system arguably are the worst people on the planet. So Sorry guys, but I gotta say it. Anything need to be said? 74 trillion is the derivative positions that sometimes single banks can have that much on their books, because everything's rehypothecated, recollateralized. It keeps getting shared out again and again. One asset, does around 50 people have it as an asset. It's nuts when you get into this stuff. The banking system is nuts, right? And he asks again, why are they doing it? What fig leaf will deposit have to protect them from the protected class? And his best cut, and he gives some data I won't go into, in a real implosion using various different kind of algorithms and looking at values and loss of value, he thinks maybe 2% of the original value of the asset. That's his best guess. And yeah, it's a game of musical chairs. In the next global financial panic, you know, this kind of thing could be kicked into place. They spent 70 years creating it, a lot of work. Are they going to just not use it? Hard to believe. And yeah, musical chairs. Now, people I know, I went to Dubai to a conference. They asked me to do a couple of keynotes, and they were kind of hedge fund managers, high net worth people, a couple of weeks ago. Great sessions, working groups, fantastic few days. But they generally are keeping a lot of their assets in this system, and they're still investing, but they're watching. And they all figure that if this comes close to fruition, they'll see it in advance. Now, the person in the street will not see it, will not have a clue. But people who are in the know can still invest, and even David Webb is still in the market, but they're just in it very carefully and watching and watching. So if anything begins to look like this thing could be coming, they're just going to get everything out into physical assets. He has some quotes at the end, I love them. He put 4 or 5 in. I count false words the foulest plague of all. So that was a sheshel, I'm not sure. Aeschylus. You see, the British, I'm Irish, and I'm missing some of this more erudite stuff. No. But yeah, great quote. And 2 from Sun Tzu, all warfare is based on deception. Absolutely. You can do with a handful of people what would require armies if you do it by deception, which is what they did. Those skilled at making the enemy move do so by creating a situation to which he must conform. They entice him with something he is certain to take, and with lures of ostensible profit, they await him in strength. So again, it's art of war stuff. You know, you draw people in and you offer them things and give them narratives. And this is the last one. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. The old Machiavelli. So I put in a bit of stuff at the end. A little bit about gold. I mean, for thousands of years, it's been and is still the only real money. In 2019, the central banks, the bad guys, moved gold from, I think, 2B asset up to class 1 asset. And the only other class 1 asset for the past half century is US sovereign debt, the dollar. That's pure liquidity, pure asset. In 2019, they moved physical gold right up into class 1, right? No one covered that. It's very quiet, but I saw it, and that's when I started buying gold. If the central banks are doing it, they're in the know. This article here, gold remonetization, is much closer than many realize. And essentially that's the thing. It will probably come back as the support for currency for the first time since Nixon dropped it in 71, and they started the money printers going insane. When they dropped the link to physical gold, they could print without limits, and all the politicians did it. All the countries followed the US. Keep printing, buying stuff to get voted in. And they never stopped, and that's why we're heading to the everything bubble. And they just noted there now, gold's remonetization is now officially a matter of global monetary policy, because they read into reports that had come out quietly, and between the lines they were effectively saying this. So gold's coming back. God knows what the value will go to. I have no idea. Colossal central bank buying in the last couple of years. They're piling up physical gold. And part of that is Ukraine and the US weaponized the dollar and confiscated Russia's assets, and the whole world realized, oh my God, we can't trust the US. We might be out of favor some point in the future. So they're moving out of US debt, and they're moving into physical gold in the central banks, because they know that's the place to go in these troubled times. And see that guy? That's Augustin Carstens. He's the head of the Central Bank of Central Banks, the Bank of International Settlements. It's like his character is represented visually in other ways, but someone did a funny joke and they put an arrow to this button here that's under significant strain. And they put an arrow and they said, trust in central banks. Which is really good. I didn't get time to put it in there. So this one, my friend the other night in Sweden, he works with me on video editing, and he just took this. He said, do you want me to do something funny with this? And I said, yeah, go ahead. So he made this in Photoshop, and I put the people in here, and he put a puddle. But it's just funny. But these people are kind of scum, and all of them, and we need to still have a sense of humor and stoicism and laugh at them and ridicule them, because they are just disgusting people. And yeah, they have a lot of power, but we'll beat them. Purchases, it's mostly East that's buying physical gold at the moment. They're really piling up in China and Russia and the BRICS countries. That's going to get interesting. And this was out in 2018, and I saw it back then. I remember thinking, it's interesting, and it's just a joke that the US is literally letting the East build up physical gold, which is real money, and the BRICS are pretty much throwing dollars over the net. And the question was like, what's going on here? You know, this was in something like Fortune, but the author was just wondering what's going on. And I think I explained some of it for you guys today. And that did not come out. But it's just gold, showing gold. In late 2020, after COVID, I did a lot of research on macroeconomics, and I learned a lot of what we're talking about today. So I went in around 1830 with pension and some bits and pieces. It's 2355 now. It's really rising fast now with the geopolitical instability and everything else. Yeah, I work with these. It's not an advertisement, but I work with Josh Shull and Pure Gold Company in London. I think they're the best guys out there, or among the best. And yeah, I give a link out at a lot of YouTubes. Just, you get a year's free storage and you get a free kind of broker session. And they don't just push gold, they give a broad view of finances and advice, but they're obviously gold biased. And just to say, in terms of, I can't give it financial advice, I mean, in fairness, but yes, I believe in metal. In 2020, I developed the phrase metal and dirt. We are in an age of metal and dirt, just based on what was happening in COVID. So physical metal, gold, silver, and maybe commodities, and land with ownership by deed, as opposed to debt covered land, which is at risk. And the people I met in Dubai were very nice. They did me a portfolio for my measly corporate pension. I believe it's worth around a fifth of a nurse's pension in Ireland, because they get defined benefit, whereas ours is just thrown in the stock market. So it's small, but I need to do the best, because we're probably going to head into a natural resources super cycle. And oil, gas and coal, all the green nonsense has made them really be suppressed, but they're the only real energy, and they're going to have to come back. So that when they invest, these guys, these funds, in an oil, gas or coal company, if the CEO begins to talk in any way about green energy or any change to sustainability, they immediately take all their capital out of that company, immediately, and move it to a real energy company. So it's just another tip. And I think that's it. I like that cartoon, so I thought I'd finish with that. So, thank you.
Well, that'll do it, folks, and I hope you found that highly informative, as I did when I first met David. And there's a link there down below. I mentioned gold during the talk. It's something I always mention to people, that Pure Gold in the UK are a superb outfit. And with the link below, you get a free consultation and a free year's storage if you do decide to take action. Completely up to you. So I also strongly suggest going to thegreattaking.com and downloading the free book and watching the free documentary, which goes into even more detail on this astonishing reality, a fact of what's been going on over the past half century. Thank you.